Did we all misread Tony Soprano's impossible escape from Johnny Sack's house? Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody seems willing to accept. That scene isn't a plot hole at all. It's one of the most realistic moments in the entire show. Think about it. Every debate about this escape treats the FBI like some flawless tactical machine, laser focused on Tony Soprano at 6:30 in the morning. But that's not what happens. The Bureau wasn't there for Tony. They weren't surrounding the neighborhood looking for him. They were there for Johnny Sack, and the raid falls apart the second one unit reveals itself too early. Tony doesn't outsmart federal agents. He doesn't vanish like Batman. He just reacts a split second before they do, and the entire operation collapses around him. Blind angles, bad timing, a perimeter not fully set, and a landscaping truck parked in exactly the wrong place. The miracle isn't that Tony got away. The miracle is that people still insist the FBI should have chased him, even though the show goes out of its way to tell us Tony was never the target. And that one simple fact, the fact almost everyone ignores, unlocks a completely different reading of the scene, and honestly, of Tony Soprano himself. Because once you understand why he gets away, you start to understand why he survives everything else. The great controversy over whether Tony Soprano could plausibly slip away from the FBI at Johnny Sack's house has somehow become a litmus test for logic, narrative comprehension, and, judging by the volume of bewildered accusations, basic cardiovascular health. Yet the escape is one of the show's more sensible moments, provided one recalls that federal agents conduct raids at dawn for a reason. At 6:30 in the morning, the intention is discretion. Surround the property, knock, maintain the illusion of control. In this particular operation, the illusion evaporates early when the unit assigned to the southeast perimeter reveals itself too soon, triggering an impromptu chase that throws the entire coordination off. The agents plan to approach from the east, with 2 units looping around the block to secure the backyard. But while unit number 2 is still creeping into position, Tony catches sight of movement, quite possibly before they even see him, and bolts. Because the chase begins prematurely, unit number 1 remains too far down the block to intervene. Unit number 3 is entangled behind a neighbor's pool, and Tony benefits entirely from blind angles, fortunate timing, and a landscape cluttered with trees, fences, and a rather heroically placed landscaping truck belonging to Sal Vitro. By the time the lead vehicles finally pull up the driveway, Tony has already turned left around the corner of the house and vanished into the ordinary suburban distance. Johnny, who has no idea which direction Tony fled, chooses a different route and promptly collides with unit number 1, sealing his fate, while Tony, obscured by parked cars and scenery, is already long gone. The incredible part is not that Tony escaped. The incredible part is that anybody refuses to accept the obvious. The FBI was busy arresting Johnny Sack, not chasing Tony, and demonstrated no interest in pursuing him before, during, or after the incident. The explanation is thus embarrassingly simple. Tony was not the target. Sometimes the easiest answer is the correct one, even if it denies certain viewers the adrenaline rush of imagining a dozen federal agents breathlessly committed to Tony Soprano's morning jog. From this small moment emerges a broader, strangely persistent belief that Tony Soprano is a universally despised figure whose every acquaintance regards him with barely concealed contempt. This theory requires ignoring nearly every meaningful relationship in the series. Beyond the immediate family, Carmela and the children, there exist numerous individuals who genuinely care for Tony, tolerate him, or at the very least prefer him alive and solvent. Artie Bucco remains the most obvious example, a friend whose loyalty precedes any mob affiliation and often survives Tony's reliably destructive influence. Agent Harris, whose job it once was to help build a RICO case against him, maintains an almost disturbingly cordial rapport with Tony, shifting over time from dry professionalism to a moral fog dense enough that he eventually uses the word we when discussing news favorable to Tony's organization. His evolution is rooted partly in familiarity and partly in the sobering realization that Tony Soprano, for all his brutality, is not the worst creature in the landscape of American threats. His sympathy is made painfully clear during the Green Grove interrogation, when the FBI plays tapes of Tony's mother scheming against her son. Harris's face momentarily broadcasts something very close to pity. Silvio Dante stands out as the rare lieutenant who not only respects Tony, but appears to love him. Inasmuch as a man steeped in violence, repression, and the world's stiffest suits can love anyone. His steadiness never precludes occasional disagreements, yet his loyalty is unwavering, most poignantly demonstrated during Tony's coma, when Silvio's bedside visit unveils a tenderness beneath the consigliere's granite exterior. Christopher Moltisanti, for much of the series, idolizes Tony with religious intensity, treating him as both father and savior, even when rage or heroin temporarily dissolves his reverence. His affection, tragically reciprocated, persists until the wreckage of their relationship becomes literal. Bobby Baccalieri, always mild, always dutiful, also remains firmly in Tony's corner, at least until Tony insists he kill a man in Canada, thereby introducing moral corrosion into one of the last unspoiled souls in the New Jersey underworld. The list continues. Brian, Jackie Sr., Georgie, Gigi, even the soft-hearted doctor or casino acquaintance who seems to like Tony well enough. Gloria Trillo loves him with catastrophic intensity. Vito, ever calculating, respects him, perhaps even admires him. Polly oscillates between devotion and paranoia, but nevertheless operates for years within the gravitational pull of Tony's approval. Even the characters who fear Tony, distrust him, or resent him, nevertheless recognize his competence, charisma, and indispensability. This is the paradox of Tony Soprano. Everyone fears him, but almost everyone needs him. This, incidentally, is exactly how organized crime functions. Affection and intimidation coexist in the same breath, woven together so tightly that one cannot tell where loyalty ends and survival begins. The true source of Tony's troubles is not emotional isolation, but strategic entanglement with the Lupertazzi family of New York. Carmine Sr., Carmine Jr., Johnny Sack, Phil, Rusty, Doc, all manage in one way or another to drag the Soprano organization into situations either financially draining, politically volatile, or violently catastrophic. The fatal mistake is not a single decision, but a pattern of cooperation that gradually blurs the boundaries between two unequal families. New Jersey is, narratively and economically, the pygmy kingdom living in the shadow of Manhattan's empire. The Sopranos depend on the Lupertazzis for access to unions, construction projects, ports, casinos, and every lucrative joint venture that extends beyond small-time scams. Declining New York's involvement would have relegated them to the margins, drugs, hijacking, gambling, and New York would likely have levied tribute anyway. The smaller family often becomes subservient to the larger one. History provides numerous real-world examples. Thus, Tony walks a perpetual tightrope between autonomy and absorption, and though he missteps, he never fully falls. Even after losing Silvio and Bobby, the show strongly implies the New Jersey family remains viable. Yet the relationship is undeniably destructive, and Tony's increasing involvement invites escalating crises. Ralph, Tony Blundetto, Vito, Paulie, each conflict becomes far more combustible when New York's beak lands in the middle of it. Conversely, New York views New Jersey as a constant headache, a wild animal that unpredictably mauls its own relatives, neighboring pets, and occasionally the hand that feeds it. Tony personally participates in shootings. His crew generates missing persons statistics at a rate that would alarm any competent epidemiologist. His relatives attempt to kill him. His cousin, a calamity in human form, murders Phil's brother. Another captain, without realizing it, leaks vital information across family lines. Tony's organization radiates risk, embarrassment, and instability. From a Lupertazzi perspective, Tony is the loose cannon kept around only because the money remains good. In another narrative, one centered on Johnny Sack, Tony would appear not as the tortured protagonist, but as the exasperating antagonist whose chaos requires constant containment. The infamous sit-down over Ralph Cifaretto and the weight-related insult against Ginny Sack demonstrates this tension. Tony deftly maneuvers Johnny into weakening his own case by demanding proof he cannot provide, cornering him into an impossible position. Johnny wants Ralph dead, but lacks the authority or justification. Carmine refuses to indulge his vice-driven rage. Tony, understanding that this is theater masquerading as justice, exploits every opening. Johnny refuses to name Paulie as his source, not out of honor, but because doing so would expose his reliance on Paulie as an informant and undermine his reputation. Paulie, for his part, would never admit he repeated the joke, even with his life on the line, because shame, survival, and betrayal intersect in ways that guarantee silence. The entire ordeal is a masterclass in image management. Johnny cannot sacrifice his mole. Carmine will not sacrifice a profitable captain. Tony will not sacrifice his dignity. The scene's brilliance lies in its deconstruction of hierarchy, ego, and plausible deniability, culminating with Johnny's tantrum exit, a moment that encapsulates his volatility and Tony's tactical superiority. Money, predictably, exacerbates everything. Paulie Walnuts, eternally strapped for cash despite decades of criminal activity, embodies the financial absurdity of mob life. He abandons dignity to steal $4,000 from an elderly woman, merely to prove his value after discovering that Johnny Sack betrayed him. Similarly, Eugene Pontecorvo, whose inheritance could have bought him freedom, instead treats honesty as a death sentence by directly asking permission to retire. The wiser approach, claiming a necessary family relocation, quietly kicking up a healthy sum, and reinvesting the remainder, never occurs to him. A tragic demonstration of how mobsters sabotage themselves with equal vigor as the system sabotages them. Ralph Cifaretto at least recognizes that cash is the only real power in this world, which is why he effortlessly disappears to Florida whenever the temperature rises. Economics remain at the heart of every conflict, including the notorious HUD scam, a consummate example of bureaucratic exploitation masquerading as entrepreneurship. The scheme involves purchasing dilapidated houses for $500,000, inflating their appraisal values to $300,000 each, and stripping $7,000 worth of copper and wiring from every structure. The net profit reaches around $722,000, which is then divided among the assorted conspirators: the politician, the intermediary, the medical frontman, each receiving a generous, if suspiciously rounded sum of $60,000. Tony, unsurprisingly, ensures his own cut surpasses that of Ralph, walking away with approximately $800,000 after quietly skimming additional amounts from his co-conspirators. It is a demonstration of pure Soprano economics: crime disguised as civic development, personal enrichment disguised as partnership, and generosity disguised as accounting oversight. The scam's complexity is irrelevant. What matters is that Tony controls it. In a world where envelopes fluctuate and loyalty wavers, consistent cash flow is the ultimate expression of power. The notion that Paulie collects over $1 million a year through tributes also reveals the exaggeration inherent in mob mythology. Soldiers cannot indefinitely sustain weekly payments of $6,000, especially when their own operations fluctuate between windfall and famine. The show frequently illustrates this, most notably when Christopher complains about cigarette tax stamping while simultaneously expecting Paulie to forfeit profit without protest. Greed clashes with greed, incompetence with incompetence, and the entire system teeters on economic fragility disguised as swagger. The dynamic between Tony and Johnny Sack exemplifies the paradoxes of mob friendship. Their relationship predates the series, grounded in years of interfamily cooperation, social events, and the mutual benefit arising when the Soprano and Lupertazzi crews share racetracks, contractors, and political contacts. Sons of important men tend to orbit one another, building relationships assumed to mature into alliances. Thus, Tony's connection with Johnny is less mystery than inevitability. Two ambitious men, raised in adjacent fiefdoms, find themselves entangled through business, social rituals, and professional necessity. Whether a bond formed over union negotiations, baptismal gatherings, or idle conversations about football, the result is the same: a familiarity easily mistaken for genuine friendship. But once Johnny becomes boss, dignity demands distance. His refusal to meet Tony in an undignified setting is simply protocol, not hostility. In the internal politics of the mob, perceived slights require compensation, and every breach of etiquette must be smoothed over by favors. Christopher's ill-timed speech at the sit-down with Johnny, an act of breathtaking arrogance from a man instructed moments earlier to keep quiet, forces Tony to make amends. He does so with the kind of elegant cruelty that defines his managerial style, by conscripting Sal Vitro into a lifetime of unpaid landscaping for Johnny Sack. The gesture costs Tony nothing, earns him goodwill, resolves a lingering business dispute, and demonstrates his uncanny ability to convert misbehavior into advantage. Tony's harshest critics fail to acknowledge this. The man's strategic acumen is formidable. His downfall arises not from incompetence, but from one catastrophic moral decision: refusing to surrender Tony Blundetto after Phil's brother's murder. In the cosmic ledger of the show, this is his mortal sin, the one act of loyalty that destroys everything. Leadership in Tony's crew is a tragicomic enterprise. Christopher, frequently cited as Tony's intended successor, repeatedly proves himself unfit for any position requiring foresight, restraint, or impulse control. His failure at the sit-down with Johnny Sack is merely one item in a litany of warnings the universe presents. The man cannot manage cigarettes, cannot manage sobriety, cannot manage envy, cannot manage silence. Yet Tony, blinded by paternal affection, consistently refuses to discipline him until the consequences metastasize. Finally, the lingering question of whether Tony and Johnny staged their brief meeting near the Brooklyn Bridge as a cover for Ralph's disappearance misunderstands the dynamics entirely. Tony uses the meeting to divert suspicion, subtly implying Johnny may have whacked Ralph. Johnny, meanwhile, remains furious over the HUD scandal and seizes any opportunity to chastise Tony. There is no conspiracy, simply two men posturing, each attempting to manipulate perception for survival. Ralph's death is Tony's secret alone, and Johnny, a man who already wants Ralph dead, has no interest in protecting him, nor the imagination to suspect Tony took matters into his own hands. In the end, the Sopranos universe is built on layers of misunderstanding, performance, and self-inflicted wounds. Decisions clothed in friendship are actually about money. Displays of loyalty mask insecurity. Outbursts of rage conceal impotence. Tony's life is one long effort to maintain control over a world constructed to collapse the moment anyone stops pretending it isn't already broken. His escape from the FBI at Johnny Sack's house is emblematic of this truth. A moment that appears miraculous only to those who fail to appreciate how disorder, incompetence, and coincidence shape every outcome. Tony survives not because he is supernatural, but because the forces aligned against him are perpetually distracted, under-coordinated, or consumed by their own agendas. The tragedy is not that he escapes too often, but that he cannot escape himself. The show is flooded with characters who love him, fear him, admire him, resent him, or all of the above. Yet he manages to disappoint every one of them, including the audience accustomed to treating him as the hero rather than the hurricane. Through all the criminal schemes, bruised egos, financial grifts, family betrayals, half-hearted friendships, earnest alliances, and spectacular miscalculations, the truth remains consistent. Tony Soprano navigates his world with immense skill, but catastrophic morality. He is brilliant, ruthless, sentimental, careless, clever, and doomed. The FBI raid merely reveals that the universe bends, however briefly, in his favor. The rest of his life reveals that no amount of money, loyalty, or cunning can protect a man from the consequences he refuses to face, especially when those consequences come not from federal agents, but from the people he claims to love, the people who depend on him, and the decisions he makes in moments where pride outweighs wisdom. In the landscape of The Sopranos, survival is not evidence of virtue, only of velocity. And Tony runs faster than most until the day he doesn't. Subscribe.